Miriwe? Why are we quiet this afternoon? Miriwe? Wakoze cyane. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to the launch of the 23rd edition of the World Bank Group's Rwanda Economic Update. Thank you so much for being with us today. My name is David Tuvi and I'm the Managing Director of Spruik Agency, and it's a pleasure to be your MC this afternoon. The latest economic update provides key insights into Rwanda's economic and trajectory and focuses on a crucial topic, and one that I'm very passionate about: accelerating skills development to foster private sector growth in Rwanda. Rwanda has shown remarkable economic resilience, but for continued success, we must address the growing skills gap in key sectors like agriculture, manufacturing, and services. Today's discussion, which I hope you'll join, will dive into how we can build a workforce that meets the demands of a modern and competitive economy, one that will be essential to realizing Rwanda's Vision 2050. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge our distinguished guests and partners, the Honourable Minister of State for Education, Claudette Irere. Welcome back. This is our second... This is the Minister of State's second time attending a Rwanda Economic Update, and we're grateful for your support. Sak Punde, the Country Manager of the World Bank in Rwanda, welcome. I'd also like to shout out to our esteemed report authors, presenters, and panelists who you'll meet shortly. Please make them feel welcome. And finally, to our stakeholders from across government, universities, research institutes, think tanks, civil society, NGOs, and the private sector, as well as our development partners, welcome. Murakaza neza. I'd also like to take a moment to welcome everyone who's joining us online. Thank you for being part of this important event. We also encourage you to join the discussion online. The hashtag is Rwanda Economic Update. Please also feel free to tag the World Bank in Rwanda. Feel free to share your thoughts, your questions, and your insights online throughout the event. And let's keep that discussion going. Finally, a few housekeeping notes. As part of our efforts to limit single-use plastics, we have water dispensers at the side and the back of the room. Feel free to move around. Thank you so much. Feel free to move around. There's also maybe some snacks left in the foyer as well. The toilets are located outside and just to the right of that back door. Finally, the Wi-Fi password for anyone who would like is Kigali 2022, all lowercase, on the Marriott Conference Network. And there will be a small card on your table with more details. In terms of our program today, we'll begin with remarks from our distinguished guests, then hear from the World Bank team who will present the report to us, followed by a panel discussion and Q&A. So be sure to have your questions ready and don't stay quiet. Throughout the event, you'll see a QR code flashing up on the screen. That's a link to download the report, the full report. So the team here will provide you with some insights, but in the meantime, feel free to also download the report. And now to kick off our event, it gives me a great pleasure to welcome Sak Punde, the Country Manager of the World Bank in Rwanda, to deliver welcome remarks. Please make him feel welcome. Thank you.
Honorable Claudette Irere, Minister of State for Education, distinguished government representatives, distinguished private sector representatives, colleagues from development partner agencies, and esteemed guests. Good afternoon, everybody. I am pleased to welcome you all to the launch of the 23rd edition of the Rwanda Economic Update. Published twice a year, the update analyzes recent economic developments, forecasts, and provides an in-depth examination of key economic and policy issues. The current edition of the update focuses on accelerating skills development to foster private sector and growth in Rwanda. The World Bank prepared this report in close collaboration with the government of Rwanda, the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning, and key education stakeholders. The data, insights, and feedback from these institutions have enriched the report and shaped the recommendations. This report is indeed a collective effort involving contributions from various players, as well as teams from several parts of the World Bank Group, including the macro trade and investment, the education sector, and the International Financial Cooperation, IFC. My colleagues will share the report's findings in greater detail, but allow me to briefly highlight some of the key conclusions and policy recommendations. Despite a challenging economic environment, Rwanda's economy continued to show resilience, growing by approximately 9.7% in the first quarter of 2024. This growth was driven by strong momentum in the services and industry sectors, as well as a recovery in food production. Another positive development is the sharp decline in headline inflation, which fell to 5% year-on-year in August 2024, down from 17.8% recorded a year ago. This reduction was primarily due to lower food prices, reflecting improved supplies of fresh produce, especially vegetables, a decrease in imported inflation as global price growth slowed, and the tightening of monetary policy. However, underlying pressures remained due to the removal of transport subsidies. Maintaining Rwanda's development trajectory and achieving the targets set in Vision 2050 will require intensified efforts to shift the drivers of economic growth towards a private sector-led knowledge-based economy. Despite considerable progress, Rwanda's skills level remain insufficient to meet its development ambitions. In fact, the proportion of the workforce with only a basic education or less is one of the highest in the region. Particularly, workers in agriculture and industry have low levels educational attainment, with all about 98% of agricultural workers having completed only basic education or less. This edition of the Rwanda Economic Update provides a comprehensive list of recommendations on how to close the skills gap and reform the skills system as Rwanda transitions to a knowledge-based economy. Let me focus on a few key points. First, expanding investments in technical and vocational education, especially targeting support for disadvantaged students and broadening work-based learning opportunities such as internships and apprenticeships is vital for providing practical experience. Second, establishing sector skills council is crucial to bridging the supply-demand mismatch in the labor market and improving job matching. Too many students are not pursuing degrees that align with job market demands. Evidence from various surveys and tracer studies indicates that employers often rely on personal networks to find employees, with little or no engagement with educational institutions. Third, accelerating efforts to address challenges in basic education, including inadequate quality, limited access, low enrollment, and high dropout rates is critical for skills development. Too many children leave school without acquiring the foundational skills necessary for higher education or further training, limiting their prospects for meaningful employment. Furthermore, the mismatch between educational outputs and labor market needs aggravates this issue. Finally, skills development and elevated levels of unemployment in Rwanda are as much a demand-side problem as they are a result of supply-side factors. Labor demands from the private sector remains weak, and there are not enough high-quality jobs being created in the country. Therefore, any sustainable solution to address the skills gap and unemployment must include interventions that stimulate private sector growth to create future jobs, while also skilling the youth across the low, medium, and high skill spectrum. The World Bank stands ready to support the government to the best of its capacity to take these recommendations forward. Overall, our support to the education sector and skills development amount to about $829 million, representing about 25% of the total World Bank portfolio in Rwanda. For example, through the Priority for Skills and Growth operation, which is about $270 million, the World Bank has laid a solid foundation for improved processes and governance of skills development in Rwanda, with a key focus on market relevance to enhance employability. Some key achievements include the development of a demand-driven, updated curriculum by the private sector and academia for about 33 TVET and degree programs in energy, transport, and logistics, and agriculture. A total of 5,365 new students, 44% of them are female, are currently enrolled in these programs. In collaboration with the private sector Rwanda TVET Board and the Rwanda Development Bank Chief Skills Office, the Priority for Skills and Growth initiative supported about 23,000 youth, 48% of them are female, in short-term training for market-driven programs, as well as upskilling of existing workers in micro and small enterprises. Last week, on September 9th, 2024, the World Bank Board approved a new skills operation, the Priority Skills for Growth and Youth Empowerment, amounting to $200 million. In line with the National Strategy for Transformation and the findings of this Rwanda Economic Update, this project aims to increase opportunities for acquiring market demand skills for 200,000 youth, vulnerable and NEET youth, those that are not educated, employed, or in training. Second, seeks to improve the quality and market relevance of TVET for the workforce. And third, it seeks to strengthen the overall governance of the skills development system. Let me end by saying I look forward to what I hope will be a fruitful discussion on the challenges and solutions to skills development in the country, boost private sector development, and promote growth. Murakoze.
Thank you so much, Sir, for those insightful remarks, for giving us insight into the report itself, and also the steps that the World Bank is ready to support Rwanda on to strengthen and reinforce the economic progress the country is making. It's now my great pleasure to welcome the Minister of State, Claudette Irere, to give her remarks. Please make her feel welcome. Thank you.
Anyway. I also want the same energy. Anyway, Sar Punde, Country Manager, World Bank, Rwanda, esteemed friends, colleagues from the development partners, from the research institutions, from government institutions, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I would like to first of all start by thanking the World Bank team for dedicating the 23rd edition of the Rwanda Economic Update on the skills importance in the economic growth trajectory that we're on as a country. Most of us here have already read the report, not just the abstract that was sent with the invitation, but we were able to also delve deeper. And I have to say that I concur with the report. Many thanks to the team that worked on the detailed findings in this report. The issues raised concerning the supply side, particularly challenges around skills development, are quite significant. Limited skill development, insufficient educational attainment, inadequate training programs in some cases, and the absence of managerial, mid-level managerial skills, expertise are obstacles to Rwanda's ability to adapt, but also to remain competitive in both regional and global markets. These are barriers that we must overcome if we're truly to fully harness our growth potential. Despite these challenges, we should not forget the strides that have been made over the past 30 years, actually. You know, if we all remember what it was like 30 years ago and look at what we're able to do, almost, I think, you know, happy to say that we've achieved almost 100% of universal access. I think this was unheard of before. And then looking at all the other things that we've been able to build alongside these alongside you partners in the past few years as well. Our education system has undergone substantial reforms across all levels. And at many times, this has not made many of us very happy, but it was necessary. But as much as we have progressed, there's no room at all for complacency. We recognize that much more remains to be done, and with stronger partnerships, we're confident that we will continue to see positive developments. Moving forward, our commitment to transforming the education system remains steadfast. We aim to build on our achievements and initiate transformative initiatives through the NST2. And I would like to highlight a few, just a small highlight of these key things that we've been working on. First of all, we're in the process of reviewing the Rwanda's higher education sector. You will have to agree with me that for the last 30 years, the focus has always been on basic education. And in fact, at the ministry, we always say that the Ministry of Education focuses 90% of its time, resources, effort on basic education. And sometimes we forget that there's, you know, the one part, the 10% that caters to the immediate supply, which is higher education, is not being given enough attention. And so this is being done to ensure that it meets the evolving demands, both local and global. As this is at the forefront of the supply side, we consider it important, but also attainable in the shorter and mid-term. And currently, I believe that some of you have already met the team. There's a team that is probably going to reach out, if they haven't, for some of your input into what we're doing now, but what we've also been a part of. Second is the transformation of the TVET landscape. First, by intentionally creating dedicated spaces, such as centers of excellence in priority sectors. I think I heard someone talking about agriculture and others as well, manufacturing, the ones that are deemed relevant and you know, that are deemed to be prioritized as well. But we're also leveraging TVET flexibility as a way to acquire relevant and additional skills depending on the demand side. Many of the partners are already supporting us in this direction. And going forward with the NST2 ambitious goals, we still count on you to continue supporting us in this endeavor. Third, teacher training, as well as emphasis on professional skills that are in demand. For instance, in the medical field, pharma, and any other field that the government deems important and relevant to the growth of the economy. And then lastly, leveraging technology, both at the system level, but also in the delivery. How do we teach and how do we deliver teaching and learning and in the classroom as well? While the above are just highlights of what is in the pipeline, but also what is deemed achievable in the medium and in the short and medium term, we know that the basis from which we operate has to undergo a complete overhaul, as the pipeline of skills we create today will significantly play a major role in the attainment of the Vision 2035 and as well as 2050. For instance, foundational learning and improving learning outcomes, these need dedicated attention. In the NST2, there's the expansion of pre-primary education from the current 35% to 65% in the next 5 years. This will require all hands on deck, because this is how we ensure that the future is better. Secondly, there's emphasis on globally standardized assessments, and this will be key going forward. OECD's PISA, which is the program for international student assessment that we're currently participating in, we're participating in next year, is a signal of the kind of change that we're aspiring to. The learnings will shape many aspects of our system going forward. And for this, we thank the World Bank for being very flexible in ensuring that PISA is part and parcel of how we do assessment going forward. PIAC, which is also another assessment, but now for adults and skills, as well as TALIS, which is around teachers' assessment, both of which are also OECD's assessments, are also in the pipeline. And as we take part in all the above, we hope they bring out the true picture of the current state, as well as highlight what needs change. Transparency will be key moving forward if we are to address the issues stated in the report, the ones that are hindering the economic growth that the country is aspiring to, but also issues in the current system. If there's one thing that we have learned in the past couple of years, is that Rwandans see themselves in the role they play in education, and they have demanded time and time again to be involved. And as important stakeholders in the change that we all yearn to see, we are devising ways to involve them in the decision-making processes, starting with sharing the true picture of the current state of the skills and the assessments that we do. And sharing findings such as this with the entire population is one step to actually show the true picture and making sure that they are partners in wanting the true change. I believe that as we are now equipped with the findings in this report, which re-emphasize what we in the system, most of us already knew, it's time to act. The government often responds by creating structures that allow change to take effect. I hope that the partners as well in the room, especially the development partners, the private sector, especially those in the skills space, we will all reassess our targets and our objectives in our different interventions through doing real introspection. And if what we have going on is not answering the issue on quality, skills, and education attainment challenges, what we just can read in the report or what we are about to hear, maybe it's time that we all have a different conversation. In conclusion, I'd like to once again thank everyone's role in the transformative journey of our education system. Together, we have so far made remarkable progress, and I'm confident that our collaboration will continue to yield positive results in the future. By working together, we not only transform our education system, but also contribute to Rwanda's broader socio-economic aspirations. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Minister of State, for those insightful remarks. Thank you for sharing some of the work that the Ministry and the Government of Rwanda is doing to improve the education system in Rwanda, responding to the market needs through training teachers, utilising technology, and also changing the conversation. I was very inspired by your remarks, Minister, where we say we may need to have a different conversation. So perhaps today we will have that different conversation in our panel discussion later on. We're now going to hear, for those of you who maybe haven't read the report or haven't downloaded it yet, there will be a QR code appearing on the screen, so please do feel free to do that. But we're now going to move to the core of today's event, which is the presentation of the 23rd edition of the Rwanda Economic Update. We'll be led by two distinguished individuals and authors of the report who helped contribute to it. Kelvin Zabaze, the Senior Country Economist, and Ruth Charo, the Senior Education Specialist. Please make Ruth and Kelvin feel welcome. Thank you.
Honorable Minister, distinguished guests, welcome. We very much appreciate your presence here this afternoon. Before giving this presentation, please just allow me to acknowledge my colleague, Peace Zimini, who leads this Rwanda Economic Update series with me. She's not here this afternoon for very good reasons, but has contributed substantially to what you will be hearing today. As you can see, this Rwanda Economic Update, the 23rd, is focused on accelerating skill development to foster private sector and growth in Rwanda. The presentation that I'm going to give with my colleague Ruth is going to be organized around 4 main points. The first, discussing a little bit the recent economic development in Rwanda and the implication for the labor market. The second point is going to be about the skill development and private sector in Rwanda. Then we will talk about the skill development in Rwanda, the state of that skill development. The presentation will end with policy recommendations to boost and close the skill gap in the country. First, let me go through some of the key messages of the report. The first one on the macro side being that Rwanda continued to stage a strong raw performance in early 2024, leading to robust recovery in the labor market. The second is that level of skill development in Rwanda remains insufficient for achieving the country's development ambitions. The third message is that investing in technical and vocational education, targeted support for disadvantaged students, mentorship programs, and emphasis on digital skills will be critical to close skill gap in the country. Finally, strengthening partnership between academia and the world of the employers through sector skill councils will contribute, we believe, to better align the training with market demands in the country. Let me start with the first point on the recent economic development. What you have here is a graph giving you a trend of the evolution of a GDP growth in the country in the recent year. The main message here is that Rwanda GDP has been very robust in the recent year. This has been the case since 2021, where after the pandemic we had almost 11% growth, GDP growth. In 2023, we had 8.2, and yearly 2024, we are having almost 9.8% for the first half. What you have here are the number for the first quarter, but the number released yesterday by the government indicate to us that even for the second half, we are having almost the same number, 9.8% of GDP growth. So this robust performance is being driven by robust expansion of the service and the construction as well. The service, because Rwanda has been able to recover substantially from the crisis of the tourism, the number of tourists in 2023 in the country increased by more than 34%. The earnings from the tourism by more than 40%. This contributed, in fact, to make the tourism, in fact, to be contributing almost 4%, the tourism earnings to be contributing almost 5% of GDP growth in the country. From the industry side, as is indicated here, the construction has been very dynamic in the country, progressing for about 11% in 2023. But I want to talk also about the momentum that we have in early 2024, where the growth number has been more than what is generally seen as the growth potential of the country, with 9.7 for the first half. So this is actually being the result of the same sector I just talked about, service, but also the construction, and two additions to that, being the manufacturing that we are also seeing, the manufacturing progressing by more than 36% in fact in the first half. And in addition to that, we also have a strong recovery in the agriculture, in the food sector. And this is an important development because it's just the first time that we are having such important growth since 2022, where we have been having a food crisis in the country. What you have here is still, on this graph here, is still the evolution of the GDP, but from the demand side. And we can see, what we can see is that the Rwandan consumer has been very confident, consuming substantially. So this growth from the demand side has been mostly driven by the consumer, by the consumption of the private sector. The banking sector has been very generous, offering loans to the consumer, to the household, but very important factor, something that I'm going to discuss later, the labor market also improved substantially. At the same time, we're having reduction of inflation. So all this contributed, in fact, to high consumption, which really helped big time for the GDP growth in the country. So this slide here is about those employment numbers I just mentioned. So I would say an important part of the story of the robust economic performance of the country this early 2024 is really about the labor market. What you can see here, you can see that for the early 2024, the level of unemployment is around 16%. There we are still above the number before the COVID. But that's actually a bit misleading. The country in terms of labor market has fully recovered, in fact, from the loss from the COVID. So in fact, this number that you are seeing here of unemployment are higher for very good reason. Just that the labor market participation in Rwanda, from where we were before the COVID, increased by 5 percentage points. And for women, it's actually increased by 7 percentage points. So if we actually take a look at the employment rate of the country, the employment rate of the country on average increased also by 5 percentage points, which means that where we are now, the employment rate in Rwanda is around 3 percentage points higher than where we were before the COVID crisis, which means households are having likely more income and the increase in their welfare. Let us move to the second part of the presentation, which is about the state of skill development. But before that, let us go through why this question is important. To understand the importance of this question, let us go through what are the ambitions of the government of Rwanda of today. We just talk about those very strong growth performance. But what many of you also know is that those 9% of growth that we are seeing here are actually still not where the government of Rwanda would like to see itself. Based on the government objective, in fact, to be an upper middle income in 2035 and high income in 2015, we need to be growing, in fact, at high number, 12 to 14% of GDP. So for that, at least two things will need to happen. We need to see the private sector playing a bigger role in the country. We also need to see, in fact, the productivity that has been relatively low in the country to really go up, so that the growth is not just about the labor and not just about the investment, so that the productivity, the other engine of the growth, can really fully play his role. And this productivity has been very low in Rwanda. And the graph that you have here, the Rwanda is the small dots in orange. You can see that the country is really below the line that's indicating the average. And we believe, in fact, there are a couple of factors explaining this relatively low productivity. We can talk about the allocation of the resources. Can talk about the cost of production in the country, the infrastructure gap. But the human capital factor of it is something that's very important. And when we talk about human capital, the skill is an important component of it. So for Rwanda to be able to really shift in terms of those growth engines, we are going to have to do something about the skill. Why doing something about the skill? Let us talk about the situation of the skill. That's what you have on this slide. So I'm going to present two situations here. One through some objective indicator and the other through the perception indicator. So the first graph that you have is giving us the share of the labor market, of people employed in labor market in Rwanda, and their qualifications. So we can see, and this is a number that has already been repeated twice, that more than 80% of the labor market in Rwanda, people, 80%, has at maximum basic education. We are talking about either primary school or lower secondary school. That's the maximum. If you take sector like agriculture, it's almost 98% of the population of the employees there with that level of skill. Let me move to the graph on the right, which is a graph, in fact, from number from the World Economic Forum. This is a survey that they conduct with key stakeholders in the economy, and mostly the private sector. And here the question, in fact, to the private sector is to know, what do you think about the quality of the skill in a given economy? For here, they have to give a rate from 0 to 100. 0 being, in fact, the worst, 100 the best. And the score that Rwanda have here is 37%. This put Rwanda, in fact, below the low-income country average, but also Sub-Saharan Africa average. This gives us an idea in terms of where we are. But I'm going to continue, in fact, talking about other indicators so we can have a better understanding of what is the actual situation. So, the graph that we have here are building from the World Bank Enterprise Survey, where this time we're asking from a survey of more than 400 enterprises in Rwanda, what do they think about the skill? So you have more than 11% of enterprises in Rwanda saying that for them, the most important constraint for their growth is skill, is the ability to have the skill they want for their growth. And when we consider, in fact, the overall constraint in the country for the private sector, if you take the sample of the private sector, we ask them, what is that you see as the main constraint for the growth? And we rank those constraints. The skill gap, the skill shortage will rank as the third, just after the access to finance and tax. So after those, what the enterprise in Rwanda see as a challenge are the skill. And what you have here on the one of the graph you have here, just telling you what are some of the areas where those skill gaps are the most pronounced. So technical, vocational, job-specific skill, these are some of the sectors where the needs are the more pronounced. Managerial and leadership skill. So this is what is coming from those enterprises in Rwanda. Now, we believe that having such shortage of skill, in fact, may have implications. And when you take a look at the level of innovation in Rwanda, because to be able, in fact, to import, absorb, adjust new technology, to proceed, in fact, in innovation, skills are fundamental. So we have two indicators here. One indicator still from the World Bank Enterprise Survey, just asking enterprises in Rwanda for the last 2 years, how many new products have you been able to put in the market? Or have you been able to change, how many times have you been able to change the process of your production? So that question is asked, in fact, in the World Bank Enterprise Survey in Rwanda, but also in many other countries in the world. In over 150 countries we have in Rwanda in the World Bank Enterprise Survey. When we make the comparison, Rwanda is that blue bar that you have here. So the first one is a product innovation. How many new products have you been able to introduce? You see that Rwanda is relatively low. And this has something to see with those skills. On the right is about the ISO, so the International Standard Organization certification. We also see that the firms in Rwanda are relatively low in terms of securing those standards. That is very essential for them to have access to international market. So basically, the conclusion here is that improving the skill is going to be capital for innovation, for productivity. So my colleague Ruth, our skill guru at the World Bank, is going now to come and tell you how we can fix the situation.
Honorable Minister, distinguished guests, allow me to ride on the protocols established by our country manager, Asa. We most sincerely thank you, Honorable Claudette, and your team. We've had continuous, candid, open discussion on the constraints and challenges of skills over last year and in the course of this year. And I highly appreciate your point on whether it's time that we need a different conversation. And I think that's an important takeaway from this Rwanda economic update. And I came back to this slide actually because of your question, whether we need a different conversation on skills development and how we are delivering on TVET, higher education, are moving forward. As my colleague Calvin has mentioned, we can clearly see most of the workforce below, most of the workforce, in the agriculture, manufacturing, which is now prioritized in NST 2, the workforce has basic education qualification or less, meaning it would be very challenging for them to participate in further training unless we relook at the different pathways under TVET or the RTB Skills Development Fund, or how we open up basic education for second chance education. So this data tells a lot. We do have different segments of youth and workforce participating in very different segments of the labor market, micro, small enterprise, private sector, self-employed, which require very, very different targeted interventions that speak to the basic education levels of these groups. So the different conversation here is, how do we then meaningfully expand our TVET in new pathways to ensure the existing workers, the youth, the current workforce can participate in furthering their qualification and accreditation to become productive. So I cannot agree more with you on the need to have a different conversation on skills moving forward. As we can see, Rwanda is predominantly young. Over 64% of the population is below 30 years of age. And of concern, most of these youth are neither in employment, education, and training. And therefore, we'll have to think again through this structure of youth and how does the supply side of skills respond to the specific constraints and challenges that this group is experiencing. The harnessing the demographic dividend is not obvious. They have to be deliberate decisions that have to be made based on the lessons from Asia on skills development directly linked to economic growth as well as inclusion. How do we reorganize how we deliver skills at the TVET higher education level to ensure that the training and employment is achieved and we can have a productive workforce moving forward. A lot of the speakers have already mentioned about the state of basic education, be it from preschool, primary, secondary, lower, upper secondary. This is the pipeline to skills development, whether formal or informal skills development. And with the current status of basic education, the low learning achievement, high levels of dropouts and repetition, we cannot expect a miracle when we come to the tertiary education level. So again, this is a place we need a different conversation, Honorable Minister. What is causing the high repetition rates and dropout rates, in particular at the lower secondary? How can we deal with this constraint to improve the quality of learning, but also retention to ensure continuously in 10, 15 years, we have the right pipeline that is feeding into TVET as well as higher education. So we do have many children in Rwanda that are leaving the system without the required competencies at basic education level or dropping out of school, meaning their ability to participate in further training and skills is already compromised. So I do believe that there is a conversation needed here on repetition and dropout. It's actually astonishing numbers, some of the highest numbers in the region on repetition and dropout. In terms of higher education, based on the findings and the analysis, we do see transition to employment by university graduate does have higher returns as well as higher salaries, which is good news for Rwanda. Compared to the region, we have a significantly increasing number of unemployed university graduates, which then means there is actually demand for managerial, professional, and technical role in the private sector for these graduates. But if we can look at the graph, I don't know whether it's on your left or right, the one with the bubbles, something is going on with the lower secondary and upper secondary. You realize the school leavers from lower and upper secondary have a higher unemployment rate than those with primary or no education. There are two assumptions here, that the jobs in the market are very low skilled, requiring no basic education, even at the primary level, or the secondary school leavers are not willing to take very low wages or do manual jobs. But that again, our Honorable Minister speaks to the fact that we need a different conversation on the TVET skills pathway. What is that cohort of secondary school leavers doing out there, not in employment, education, or training? In terms of the quality of institution, again, this is an important message, because for the TVET graduates as well as the university graduates, the graduate output or outcomes must be directly linked to labor market outcomes. And based on the analysis, we have looked at the data. We do see the CMU, Carnegie Mellon University, currently at the highest transition to a labor market at 95%. And our public institutions, based on the surveys, the TVET and University of Rwanda, on average is at 50%. Looking at the employer satisfaction service, what is it that sets apart the CMU graduate? There's the technical competencies aspect, but there's also the soft skills, whether it's communication or branding. And I do also hope, as we have this different conversation of our graduates in TVET University, we could then explore how to meaningfully integrate these professional development programs as core to the curricula of both TVET and universities. And linked to the earlier presentation, the role of skills to private sector competitiveness and growth. We can clearly see some of the companies here, the biotech, VW, are really thriving, mainly because they have access, ready access to relevant graduates with the right competencies and skills from the CMU. And I hope this gives us a clear example on the role of high quality relevant skills development to private sector growth and competitiveness. At the same time, we acknowledge the CMU model is expensive. Replicating it, scaling it up needs quite some thinking with our private sector colleagues because it's highly dependent on funding and support from the development partners. In terms of aligning student specialization to the labor market demands, this might look obvious, but it is not obvious. Moving forward, again, Honorable Minister, working with the TVET institutions as well as the University of Rwanda, career guidance and mentoring is critical. Have visited a number of IPRCs, UR campuses, and I pose a very simple question to the person in charge of career guidance and mentoring. Have you looked at the last labor market report? Do you know about the LMIS? And the obvious answer, they are lost. So there is really no way an office or a team can be counseling and guiding students on areas of serving as an LMS, but can be utilized by the end user, the academia, the graduates, the guardians, the parents, to make decisions on specialization so that then the outcome of the graduates from TVET universities can directly speak to priority skills that are required in the market. In terms of expanding work-based learning, internships and apprenticeship, I know we do have discussions on the work-based policy. We've had discussions on the importance of internships, apprenticeships, including for the youth that are neither in employment or at training. But what we observe during the visits and interactions with students, faculty in this institution, we do not have a structure dedicated funding to actually support these critical areas, and is one of the promising interventions to ensure then the skills development is speaking to some of the critical segments of the labor market. So I think being able to have a dedicated funding support for internships is critical. The feedback we get from students and faculty, they have to find these internships, apprenticeships on their own. The lecturer might show up one time or not. There are issues of transport and accommodation. So as much as this is in the strategy and policy moving forward, how do we actually have an operational plan for internships and apprenticeship, have it costed and funded to ensure then it is practical and speaks to the competencies and skills that those students need to actually acquire during internship and apprenticeship. In terms of the training institution, the supply side, we do see a high demand for training in public institutions. We can see the high enrollment as presented in the data, but at the same time for IPRC, for those who would like to pursue high-level TVET training, there are constraints of the IPRC to actually enroll all the students that are qualified due to infrastructure, faculty, and equipment constraints. And one of the strategies the RP is actually adopting is hybrid learning to increase access. So there are significant efforts as we have our new conversation that we need to pay attention to significantly address the issue of the mismatch between the labor market and to improve the job matching. Again, from the surveys that have been analyzed and the reports, most of the students, the graduates, rely on personal network or their friends or job adverts to be able to find employment or to find out what do companies, employers, private sector need. And I think on the job matching, we have to be deliberate moving forward to ensure the career offices, the youth, parent, guardians, using even the social media if need be, are actually aware on where to find the information that is required and further institutionalize functional sector skills councils to ensure that the curriculum, the internships, the apprenticeships being prioritized are actually led by the market, and they are also defining what are these soft skills that they require, including the English proficiency as part of the core curriculum. So the labor market challenges in Rwanda, in summary, we can clearly see is both demand, as Calvin rightly presented, as well as a supply side meaning the side of the training institution. On the demand side, as Sir noted is in remarks, the employment landscape is largely informal, self-employment. This landscape is not changing soon, overnight, and therefore the fact is most of this youth leaving secondary education, TVET, will find themselves in the informal sector for a number of years as the economy transitions, and therefore this requires a conversation. Then how do we relook at a new TVET skills development system that actually addresses the very unique strategic interventions for skilling of this segment to serve the micro, the informal, the self-employment as we continue to support the growth in the formal private sector. We can also clearly see that the existing workforce, over 81% of all employees are in temporary contract, which again speaks to the informality, the micro nature of the demand side for job creation and employment. So in terms of interventions that are prioritized, this is not a new slide to Honorable Minister. Again, we've had this conversation, mitigating barriers to higher education, and particularly the student financing, not just in the formal TVET or university, as we've seen with the structure of the NEET youth, and the need for specific packages for various segments of the labor market. How do we ensure this financial assistance that actually speaks directly and supports the different structures of youth existing workforce to be able to further their training, acquire the skills that they need, get certified, and enhance the productivity of whichever area they are engaged in. Engaging in basic education, we've had this conversation with UR and RP for the students in secondary education to appreciate the requirements for certain priority skills training programs in TVET and the university level, and be able to choose, for example, the STEM pathways while in high school. In terms of the higher education, the programs that are being offered, the infrastructure, the student-teacher ratios, the graduation rates, we've also had a conversation on this with the University of Rwanda, and I'm aware they are engaged in a very robust exercise to restructure and scale down the redundant programs and ensure whatever they are offering moving forward is directly aligned to the priority skills as well as relevant. So we do hope this is not a one-time off exercise but needs to be fully institutionalized and directly linked to the CSO, labor market information system, and the sector skills councils, so that curricula is continuously adjusted to the changing nature of work. Digital technology, green economy will have to ensure the curricula is continuously aligned to the immediate needs. In terms of the practical aspect of TVET and higher education, the constraint, again, as I mentioned earlier, the work-based learning, the adopting technology for simulations, if purchase of hard equipment is expensive for all the required programs, how do we leverage technology for hybrid learning, and also possibility of partnering with international regional universities and private sector as part-time lecturers. And lastly, we'd already discussed the need to increase internships for NEET youth, but meaningful internship with clear, dedicated funding that can actually enable them through that internship, probably participate in recognition of prior learning. They are assessed and they are certified. The internship, most of it now, does not necessarily lead to any form of recognition or certification, making it difficult for that youth to actually seek employment. Again, the establishment of career services, I've already spoken into that. We've also the need for national ranking of institution. We know this is a sensitive discussion, but Honorable Minister, you mentioned we need a different conversation. This is an important area. The TVET, the IPRC, the various campuses of UR, the private universities, it is time we started getting data out to the parent, the youth, to show the transition of their graduates to the labor market, and therefore the youth, the existing workers interested in upskilling, the parents can make a decision in which institution, in which program is my child highly likely to gain relevant skills that are aligned to the labor market, and quality education. I think that level of competition is healthy to break the current status quo where the training institution know come year in, year out, they are going to receive funding from government and is business as usual, and they can think through performance-based financing and grants for program institutions that are delivering output of graduates that are highly linked to priority skill sectors. The soft skills, readiness to work, we've spoken about that, as well as the funding for upskill program. The data again did reveal many of the firms do not actually have resources to support upskilling programs of their existing workers, and therefore productivity is low, even as some of the medium, small size enterprises move towards automation. I'll stop here, Honorable Minister and Sir, and back to the MC. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth and Kelvin. Can we give a big round of applause to Ruth, Kelvin, and the entire team, including Peace, who prepared the report. There's a lot of information that we've just heard, some of it new, some of it old, but all of it critically important for all of us in this room to have that different conversation, to start investing more and differently in the kinds of investments that will lead to better skills development and better employment outcomes for Rwandans. A reminder, if you are joining us online, thank you so much for being with us. Please use the hashtag Rwanda Economic Update, even for those in the room. The World Bank comms team is retweeting all of your posts, so I encourage you to do that. I would now like to turn to a short video which summarizes the findings of the report. I think Kelvin and Ruth have done a great job of taking us through them, and now let's just have a quick summary. Thank you.
Despite a challenging international environment, Rwanda's strong economic momentum continued in the early 2024, after averaging 8.2% in 2022 to 2023. Real GDP increased by 9.7% in the first quarter of 2024. This strong growth performance was driven by the continued expansion in services and industry in 2023 and the recovery in food production in early 2024. The labor market saw improvements in the last quarter of 2023, with over 500,000 new jobs created, marking the most substantial reduction in unemployment since the pandemic. To achieve Rwanda's development ambitions, skills development will be paramount. Rwanda is on a positive path, but challenges remain. Skill development is crucial for diversifying the economy, improving productivity, creating jobs, and achieving Vision 2050 goals. Yet, the proportion of the Rwandan workforce with just basic education or less was 83% in 2021, and it is one of the highest in the region. As a result, the percentage of firms identifying the skills gap as the biggest obstacle to growth in Rwanda has risen over time, from 3.3% in 2006 to 11.5% in 2019. Skills deficit stems from challenges in basic education, including low learning outcomes, limited access at pre-primary, secondary and post-secondary, high repetition rates, and high dropout rates. Strengthening of the skills development system should focus on improving labor matching, quality, relevance, and equity. To achieve this, the report recommends the need to focus more on sector-specific skills development and enhance digital literacy to ensure an educated and skilled workforce that aligns with the country's economic transformation goals. Strengthen the skills ecosystem in Rwanda in these three areas: access and equity, by identifying and mitigating barriers to higher education and training; quality and relevance, by increasing qualified teaching staff, designing up-to-date curriculum, matching job seekers to employers. The report also notes areas that could benefit from further investment, including work-based learning such as internships or apprenticeships, enhanced entrepreneurship ecosystem, comprehensive digital skills framework, more TVET pathways including the opportunity for dropouts and unemployed to improve their formal qualifications.
Thank you so much, and a big round of applause to the team who put together the video. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of this information is already online on social media, so please go ahead and follow World Bank Rwanda on X, on Twitter, and repost. We're now going to move to the second part of the event, which is our panel discussion and a discussion with you as the audience. So please have your questions ready. Please listen intently. I'm sure that we discussed with the panel, so they're happy to take challenging questions. So feel free to challenge them. I would like to welcome our moderator, Abha Prasad, the practice manager at the World Bank Group, who will be guiding our discussion. Joining her on the panel will be Stella, the chief economist at the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning, Francois Ngoboka, the acting chief skills officer at the Ministry of Public Service and Labour, Amable Kimenyi, the vice chairperson of the Private Sector Federation, and Pedro Sadan Ivantes, the practice leader at the World Bank. Please make them feel welcome, and I'll hand over to you, Abda. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. That's nice. I still get some energy in the room. So I think we have the ministers probably stepped out, but still, I do all the protocols observed, and welcome all of you guests and my fellow colleagues from the World Bank, and of course our distinguished panelists. I don't see Pedro online, so could I get, is he online? And Pedro, you do hear us?
I am online. I don't know if you can see me or not.
I think we can all see you, and so we are online for that. So we have around 45 minutes for this discussion, and I'm hoping my colleague Calvin will keep time and let me know when to stop. So the plan is to have around 20-25 minutes of Q&A here. And then we want it to be very interactive, very participatory. So we would like questions from you, and pose what you like, the tough ones or the hard ones or the easy ones. As the minister said, it's time for a different conversation. So with that, let me turn to my esteemed panelists. And let me first turn to Pedro, who's right now in Nairobi. Pedro, as you heard, the economic update has highlighted that Rwanda has a skills deficit, and it's primarily rooted in challenges with basic education, including the quality, limited access, and also high dropout rates. But we know very well that long-term productivity gets hindered and by this low human capital formation, as too many children will leave the education system without acquiring the foundational skills that are needed for gainful self-employment, higher education, and and further trainings. So, Pedro, could you share with us what you see as the major bottlenecks in addressing these education challenges? Additionally, what are the World Bank's priority investments to tackle inefficiencies in the education system? And what can Rwanda learn from the international best practices in this area? Over to you, Pedro.
Thank you, Ava. Good afternoon to everybody. It is really an honor to be part of this panel and share the panel with such distinguished guests. I wish I had been there in person. It's always a pleasure to be in Kigali, but in this time I couldn't join. And also thanks for the wonderful presentation by my colleagues, Calvin and Ruth. I found it very informative. So on the question, so first I think we need to recognize the progress that has been made, right? Sometimes we focus a lot on what needs to be done, but I think it's also important to look back at the last 20 years. And if you look at the trends in sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of countries have implemented free education, both in primary and secondary. They have expanded infrastructure and hired significant numbers of teachers. And as a result, over the last 20 years, the number of children enrolled in schools in the Africa East region has increased by over 60 million children. So there has been a lot of progress made. Now, there remain a lot of challenges. And if you look at the Human Capital Index, which is an index that captures health and education outcomes, and it's done by the World Bank, Sub-Saharan Africa has the lowest levels compared to other regions. And this Human Capital Index is highly correlated with economic growth and a bunch of other indicators. Now, a big reason why Human Capital Index is low in the region is the education part of the index. And that measures two things. One is the expected years of schooling, so the number of years a child is expected to spend in school. And the second one is the learning levels. And when you look at the region, you find that the region is trailing for the most part in both aspects. So there is really a need to first increase access. So when you look at enrollment rates, we have achieved primary universal enrollment in most of the region, but enrollment in pre-primary and especially in secondary is trailing, and most worryingly, it's stagnant. So it's not increasing in recent years. So the region as a whole really faces a challenge in increasing secondary education. The second aspect is learning, and we had a learning crisis before even COVID. The learning levels were low, but the school closures and the lack of often proactive programs to remedial education on after the school closures means that we're now in a worse place. So an estimated 9 out of 10 basically students in age 10 cannot read a simple paragraph and answer simple questions about it. So we need to focus on those two areas, expanding access to secondary education first and learning. Now, that's only the first part of the challenge. The second part of the challenge is once you have that basic foundation of human capital is putting it to productive use. And that means increasing access to upskilling and tertiary education to make sure that the students that complete basic education actually have skills that are useful for the labor market and contribute to economic transformation. The cost of not doing this is huge. Right now, there are about 50 million children in Eastern and Southern Africa out of school, out of 3 being girls. And by 2030, if things continue this way, there will be 62 million children. And if we continue to project with population growth, it will get a lot worse. So I really like the point made by the Honorable Minister about a different conversation, because we really need a different conversation if we want the region to develop to its full potential. Now, as a response to this, the World Bank is we have developed a business plan, that we call it, which is our priorities in the region between now and 2030, which shows how urgent this is. It's a very short time period. And there's a bunch of objectives there, but I'm going to highlight 3. So the first one is reducing learning poverty. The Africa East region is projected to have a primary age population of 138 million by 2030. And we aim to reduce learning poverty from 89%, so 9 out of 10, to a reduction of 25% to lift 30 million children out of learning poverty. So that's the first priority for us. The second priority is to reduce the out-of-school children. This is mostly adolescents and it's mostly girls. And the aim is to reduce by 50% the number of children that are not enrolled in school. And the third challenge, the third objective that is very connected to what the presentation that Ruth was making is really on the skill side. And we have been focusing a lot on primary and secondary education, but there is a critical number of youth that are suffer from high unemployment, high underemployment, and we really need to provide upskilling opportunities for them. In terms of lessons for Rwanda, let me highlight a couple. I think the report is pretty comprehensive, so I have less to say on that area. But I think that the report makes it very clear that skills and education is critical for the future of Rwanda. And talks about this, as Ruth was saying, setting the foundation so that children have foundational skills that they can build upon in secondary and above. As I said, expanding secondary education, which continues to be a challenge. And the most important one that covers us today is the skills area. And really, evidence shows that TVET and skills upgrading, when it's done well, it improves employability, it improves productivity, it facilitates technology transfer, and contributes to economic transformation. Now, for this to be effective, as Sarah was saying, we really need to have closer ties to the productive sector. As Ruth was saying, increase the opportunities for internships, and really have the productive sector and the private sector in the driving seat for this. We have a couple of projects that are supporting this, as Sarah was saying, and we really think education and skills are a priority for Rwanda. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Pedro. And really, it's heartening to learn that over 60 million children came back to school, but it's also very shocking to learn the number of kids which are still not in school. And I like the priorities that you put forward in terms of reducing learning poverty, reducing the number of non-enrolled kids, getting them back to school, and improving the skill set. But let me turn to the key player in this, the government. And let's hear, first of all, let me congratulate Stella on the strong growth performance of 9% in Q1 2024. I don't think there are many economies today with that kind of a great growth rate. So it's a huge, huge appreciation to the government, the country, the private sector, and a round of applause for that. Yeah. So as we see, the REU recommends expanding public investment and capacity in TVET and higher education, and this is what we just heard from Minister also, as well as from Pedro. But given the shrinking fiscal space and the ongoing fiscal consolidation plans, what is the government's strategy to maintain these investments in learning and skill development priorities?
Thank you very much, Abba, and thank you to the World Bank team for the invitation to come and contribute to this discussion, which is an important one in terms of skills development for growth in Rwanda. This is a not easy question. When you have to look at the limited means as government that we have and make sure that we respond to all the needs of the economy, not only skills, but also any other needs that we have. And you rightly mentioned that our fiscal space has shrunk over the past recent years, and there is a good reason for that. And we are actually one of the few countries which have been able to use the space that we were having to be able to face different shocks that we had in the past. So there is a reason why it has shrunk, and I just wanted to give that background so that people understand that government has been using its budget to make sure that we face issues like COVID, we face issues like the hike in inflation, we face different issues that we're putting at the center of our strategy the population of Rwanda. And skills also is another issue that we need to continue investing in. As Honorable Minister mentioned, we will continue. We are already doing a lot in basic education, and I think this is something that we are going to continue doing even in the future. And there has been a lot of investment, and I can take the example of the projects in school construction, massive school construction that we did in 2020, and as well as TVET. But of course, when you increase the number of schools, that implies that you also need to procure teachers. And that means you need to have enough salaries to pay them. That also means that you need to make sure that those schools don't drop out of schools, and you need to put programs like school feeding. So all that is quite heavy on the budget, and I agree, if we continue, it may not be necessarily sustainable, and we need to innovate and think differently about these issues. And there are many different ways to approach that, but if we have to use the different tools that we have at hand, when you look at, for example, that project, we did not use any type of means to be able to finance that. We have prioritized concessional financing, which is one thing that we can do instead of raising expensive money. So when you look at the different type of financing that we have on the market, concessional financing is what we've been able to use. But we are also implementing our medium-term revenue strategy, which is a strategy which have domestic revenue package measures that are going to be implemented going forward. And that will also continue to give us different sort of revenues and the most sustainable revenue that we can tap into. But even if you have affordable financing, how do you make sure that you are actually spending on the right things that you need to spend on? So then you need prioritization. And prioritization has to be linked with, of course, what we've been discussing in the presentation. What are the current market needs in terms of skills? Current market needs, but also future market needs. And then you prioritize based on that. So in terms of the current market needs, we've seen in the presentation from colleagues from the World Bank, and we can also see that in different numbers that our statistic office has been publishing. By the way, yesterday we got the release of the Quota 2 GDP. So you may want to update your presentation where we have 9.8% and we continue to be resilient. That's a proof that despite what we see in the region and all over the world, Rwanda's economy continues to be quite resilient. But what is driving that growth? We've seen, and that's where I wanted to link to the issue of prioritization. Yes, we have manufacturing industry which have significantly grown, construction sector. We have services which continue to also perform. But a large share of the population is still and will continue to be in the agriculture sector. And since we are a country which is centered on population well-being, I think the priority should be on what we do about agriculture sector. Agriculture sector doesn't require a lot of skills indeed currently, and you've seen it into the numbers. People who are in primary and lower secondary, in primary are the ones or who don't have any other skill, are the ones who are actually employed in that sector. But how do we make sure that we modernize? How do we invest? And since the government has limited means, using the cheapest means that we are able to access to, we need anchor investors. Anchor investors in those sectors. And I can give an example. We have a project that was financed by the Warren Buffett Foundation. And that project not only bringing in terms of funding into the sector, but also training, providing skills that otherwise people wouldn't be able to access. Those type of investor would also invest in innovation. Innovation is hard, but it is required. It is necessary. We need innovation. If we don't innovate, we are not able to have competition. We are not able to be productive. So there is need to prioritize, given our limited means, where we need to focus our efforts. And given the strategic orientation of the NST2 that was presented yesterday and last week by the Right Honorable Prime Minister, agriculture, for us to be able to achieve at least 6% going forward, we will need to modernize. We will need to bring in technology, innovation, but there is also animal resources that will have to improve productivity of animal resources. And we already have a market demand with the new powder milk industry that was created in Nyagatare. So those areas will require specialized skills. So I just wanted to say that prioritization, use of cheap financing available on the market, I think those are the things that we can already use as tools to be able, as we build again our buffers that were used during the different crises, to be able to respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Stella. And I think what Honorable Minister set the tone with think differently, and that's sort of echoing through in terms of how can you innovate, how can you use all the tools available to you, and most critically, financing and how to prioritize that. I think that's important to make sure that you modernize and invest and, you know, not only think of the jobs today, but the jobs of tomorrow. What's the role of AI? I mean, those are certain questions that we have to really take a hard look at and answer. Let me turn to you, Francois, because we've heard a lot about the skills gap, and we also know that the formal market just adopts a fraction of the workers that come in, and there's almost 1/3 of the workers who are in this NEET, not employed, not educated, not having training. So what steps is the government taking to address this, particularly in fostering this industry-academia linkage to ensure that private sector enterprises can attract workers with the necessary skills and competencies and, you know, help boost youth employment in Rwanda?
Thank you. Let me also thank the World Bank for this opportunity to contribute to this discussion. Sometimes when things are presented at macro using percentages, it doesn't help a typical normal person to understand. Let me give an example of a discussion I had one year and a half ago with an investor. At that time, I was working with Rwanda Development Board, and we were at the forefront of discussing and attracting investors. So one investor who is actually now investing and employing more than 400 workers was coming to understand the labor market, to understand the facilitation for him to invest. And then when we were sitting and discussing, he mentioned that he's going to employ more than 1,000 workers within 3 years. So, and then he said, how can you help me to have a pool I can outsource from the workers that are close to my expectations? So as you would expect, we jumped asking a question: what are the qualification and education levels you are looking at. And he mentioned that I don't care much. What is much important is how faster someone can learn, how good someone can communicate, and how good he can work with computer. Those are the things he mentioned during that discussion. So that illustrates that what was presented, being faster to learn requires having the foundational learning, the basics that can help you to learn faster. That means what we are learning is not static. It has to be constantly upgraded. So communication means like teamwork, working with others, interacting with others, interpreting instruction of employers. So from the three things he mentioned, you can see that they are acquired through foundational learning. There is soft skills. So that gives a message that we have to embed those attributes throughout our education system, from early to graduation. But as you mentioned, what the government is doing, as part of the World Bank project that is going to support, we're planning to strengthen our career guidance to make sure that at all levels we support the learners to understand step by step how those attributes, how those skills that are very important, how they can learn it. And how do we avail the curated learning content attractive for youth? So it's going to that is going to be, and recently when this year in Tech at the university, at the higher learning institution, especially at the University of Rwanda, they made mandatory work, employability skills learning from the first 6 months, if I remember well the period. So those are the things the government is saying. But as you said, having the NEET, youth not in education, training, and employment of 33% of youth, it's really a big challenge of the labor market. And when the figures were being presented, 90% of our establishment are micro and small, but they are employing. The work-based learning using those existing employers, and how do we make market development skills adapted or aligned to the needs of the micro and the small enterprises is also very critical. So for that segment of the youth who are outside of the labor market, apprenticeship and workplace learning is very important, and it's really a priority for the government for in the next years. If Stella mentioned that prioritization has also to happen in skills development, as you mentioned, the resources are not enough as we want. So the skills office, together with the support with the government and the World Bank, we're investing a lot in labor market information to understand current and future skills need, to understand what are the education programs that have good employment and labor market outcomes, to guide the investment in that angle. So I'm reminded that the time is not on our side. But I think I can also have a time later to talk on sector skills councils. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francois, for keeping to time, and also, I guess the key things that you pointed out in terms of the ability to learn, communicate, and the computer skills, the foundational, but also the issue of prioritizing and investing in labor markets with current and future skill requirements, to guide your investment. I mean, it's the seeds that you sow today would be helpful for getting the jobs and the skills of tomorrow. We heard a lot about the private sector, so let me turn to Aimable and ask him that what additional actions does he believe the government and other stakeholders should take to further address the skills gap and the challenge that is facing Rwanda's private sector? What role do you see for the private sector, and in particular measures to increase the interest of private sector firms to provide upskilling opportunities? And
thank you very much.
You have a survey, so I'll turn
Thank
to
you very much. Thank you, the World Bank, to organize this amazing event. Thank you, Honorable Minister Irere. We are partnering in the Rwanda TVET board because of our leadership. Now we are co-chairing. Now everything they are doing, they have to engage us. We are at the beginning, but a lot of it is happening. So the private sector is an interesting, we are looking things differently from your angle. And Honorable Minister said, we did amazing 30 years in Rwanda. And that's what makes us crazy to think we can do crazy things in the coming years. We are not scared. I see some scaring numbers and faces. Don't be scared. On our side, we are really fired up. We are really fired up because we have something called Made in Rwanda. It's a big brand. I was in Zambia last week deploying what we call electronic billing machine. It's a billion product. If we can help all Africans to collect their taxes like we do here, it's a $1 billion product. So the Rwandan market, I didn't see it in your presentation. So what I'm trying to say here, and what I want from you guys is to take like 10%, everything it's school, it's going to Irere. I want also to bring something to us, to PSF. Thank you. Like, the play of skills is outside education. The game is with us. Now, PSF, we are good as like me, I'm the CEO of Algorithm, I'm in software, I'm exporting. Me, I'm good. But the private sector is not good. Because what you are saying, the changing conversation from our minister, that's why I'm telling you guys, you should help us to be organized, to coordinate more things, because we have solution. My colleague is saying they don't have enough money to fund. We have money. We have money. I'm telling you that project of $1 billion outside Rwanda, the export is crazy with Rwanda. So if she's looking inside the wallet, the Rwandan wallet, we are looking the global wallet. Now, to make the global wallet, yesterday 2 of my staff went to Zambia. Then what happened is, if I got that contract, I have many more. This is a small survey from my, we have leadership across the country, so I asked them, how do you see skills and formal? How can we live informal to formal? Quickly, what they are saying is what you said is that the curriculum is not good. It wasn't in Rwanda. Curriculum not good, like this. The student not like this, you see. But very interesting answer on the next page. This is what they were saying. It's like this. But this thing is very interesting. I know from, this thing is very interesting, not visible, but these are shops, like shops in the country. The best are amaduka, like shops. The second are, I know some, like they are doing ubudozi, like things like that. So really high skills are not here in our private sector. And why? We should think about that. Why we don't have high skills in those regions? There is an issue. Here they're talking what stopped them to be formal, but there was of course money, but you will see things like they want to export, but the free trade zone is there is nothing there. You see, they are saying something like they don't have enough data for the market. So they are really keen to do more, and if they do more, I think skills, we are the pooling part. So to close, I hope we have a chance to discuss. CMU World Bank show there. Who built CMU? It was the private sector. So it's not CMU who will make us become who we want to be. The private sector can make CMUs. That's how US did. I don't see why we should do this the other way. So my message is help us to be organized. It's not too much. You can share, but you make us organized. You can have extra impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Imable. That's very interesting. And I think your tagline should be, help us to help you, right? And it's interesting to note, and especially for Stella and Francois, that they have the money and they are willing to tap, as he says, the global wallets. And I think that's definitely, gets away with the constraint that you have on the financing side. So thank you so much, very interesting. Let me turn to Francois on one more point, and which he kind of alluded to when he was talking, but maybe we can unpack a bit more. What measures do you think should be taken to ensure the effective establishment and operation of the Sector Skills Council? And particularly, how can we align that with the country's unique context and the labor market needs that you have here in Rwanda?
Thank you, Moderator. The Sector Skills Council, the triple helix, whereby the private sector is in a driving seat. Recently, we started with 5: mining, infrastructure, manufacturing, tourism and hospitality, and finance. And the aim is to have platform to bring on board private sector practitioners and professionals to actually be given a forum in a structured way to contribute to understanding the skills they need, but also curricular development, and also understanding better what are like the employment perspective for the training to be aligned to that. We have been having initiative within our high learning institution of engaging private sector, and sometimes seeing when they request private sector to delegate someone in curriculum development, some private sector companies delegating someone who is not having a lot of work in the company, like a spare wheel. So the Sector Skills Councils are expected to change that perspective and the narrative. And for the private sector to own and be at the driving seat in skills identification, skills development, and the curriculum information. So those are the key to Sector Skills Council. And each Sector Skills Council, as the sector is big, we're going to also to have value chain within those sectors, and also have sub activities with specific working sector skills councils. So it's an initiative private sector federation is supporting a lot, and also academic institutions and the government. And as it was mentioned by Ruth, it's going to be really a big focus for this coming project.
Thank you so much. Thank you. May we turn to the audience for questions? We have around 20-25 minutes, so please. Just introduce yourself and let us know which organization, and then over to you.
Hello, my name is Austin Chulu. I'm from UNDP. I had a number of questions, but I think I'll limit myself to just a few. The first question is, who's growing? We've been given 10 point, the latest figure is what, 10.?
9.8.
9.8. But who's growing in the economy? We told that 92% of the enterprises in our economy is the micro enterprises. So who is constituting that 9.8%? If we can get to the bottom of that, perhaps we can unpack who is left behind. That is critical for me, because we might be growing, we might be probably the best in Africa, but who knows who's growing? And for me, that's a challenge. The second one is, if we juxtapose the ISO certification rank that Rwanda has with the rest of Africa, and look at Malawi. Malawi was the highest. And I think, if I recall very well, Malawi had a growth rate of 0.9% in 2022, and this year, I think it's only around 3%. Whereas Rwanda, which has one of the lowest ISO certification, is growing so highly. Is there some contradiction there between ISO certification and growth rates? Lastly, on the zigzag graph that we saw earlier on unemployment, just a question of clarity. Did it include agriculture? Because I noticed every first quarter the employment levels were down, unemployment levels were down, and in the second quarter they were up, in the third quarter they were down, and in the fourth were up, in that combination. So it was a zigzag line. Was agriculture featured in that unemployment? And if it was, perhaps we can net out agriculture and look at the seasonality of each of the quarters and then relate it to employment or unemployment. Thank you very much.
Could we take another question if there is?
I'm here.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thanks a lot. I'm Joseph Nkurunziza, or Mr. Civil Society. So thanks a lot for this great discussion. So, but my take-home message to the World Bank, this is the third economic update that I'm attending, and I've never seen a panelist from the civil society. So whatever we are discussing, if there is no civil society, then what the minister said, that there is need for transparency. So we want to be able to see that. So coming to, and also too, when Mr. Calvin was presenting, he did mention that the banks have been generous in giving out loans to consumers. So I would say that no, the banks have not been generous to the consumers because the interest rate is around 18 and 19%. And in the report, you said one of the recommendations that expand access to affordable finance and business advisory services to SMEs. to create job creation. So we are not answering the problem. With the current interest rates, these SMEs are just involved in subsistence economics, buying things from China and Dubai, etc. So if we want to see job creation, we need to find a way of creating access to affordable finance by making sure that these SMEs can be able to access loans below 10%. I know commercial banks are interested in money, but we need to find a way. That's where we shall be able to address this. We shouldn't sit next year, 24th economic update, saying the same things and we forget to address the problem. Yeah, so going to my question. So what frameworks are there in place to make sure that we monitor the effectiveness of skills development program so in fostering the private sector growth? So in all the discussions, I didn't see how civil society can be able to track the progress of holding the stakeholders accountable for ensuring equitable access to some of these programs. Because at the end of the day, if civil society is not part and parcel, we shall keep having these nice indicators, as he asked, who is growing, who is growing. But if we have civil society monitoring this or tracking the progress, so we shall be able to advise and to say that this is where the issues are in order to improve the quality of education and also to make sure that we address the school dropout. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Moses. So let's get on with the answers for these two rounds of questions, while I really urge the participants to keep another round ready so that we can have a good interaction. So maybe Stella could answer the question of growth and who's left behind. I don't know if you want to tackle on the ISO certification and or maybe Ruth or Calvin. Calvin, could you answer on the agriculture? Whether the unemployment is inclusive or exclusive of the agriculture and the seasonality. Then your point noted on including a panelist from the civil society. I'm sure we will do that and expand the panel next time. Make sure to have that person. And Francois, would you please, unemployment, okay, super. Francois can also answer that. And also in the monitoring of the progress for the private sector, and you can answer that. And on the bank rate, I don't know if we have any of the bankers here or from the financial sector, anybody? And I'm not sure what the real rate of interest is, so we have somebody there. Okay, super, thank you so much. So let's go, Stella, Francois, Aimable, Calvin, and Ruth. Thank you.
Thank you, Abba, and thank you for these questions. I think the great thing with this gathering with the Rwanda economic updates, it really helps to react and reflect on these questions that you raised. So in terms of growth rate, we talk about 9.8, 9.7, 10%. We've even had at some point 11, 12%. So who is really growing? I think it's a fair question. The way we look at these numbers, so we have a sectorial breakdown of the GDP. And in the most recent years, when you look at the sectorial breakdown, you will see that services, industry are contributing mainly to that growth. And I think this is what also Aimable was referring to when he was when he was showing us the numbers, showing that retail, trade, so it's basically the services sector. But the important point, and the reason why your question is important, is what we mentioned earlier. Agriculture also is contributing, but not at the same level as services. Yet, agriculture sector has the largest share of the population. So the reason is that we need more innovation in that sense. Otherwise, we may be stuck into exporting or relying to one or two main products, which is a big issue in Africa. And as long as we don't focus on that aspect of the economy, we are not going to be able to create more jobs, because however much all those sectors are performing, but this is still the core, and that's what government is working on and will continue to do, even into NST2. One of the main strategic orientation is really to emphasize on the potential. So the fact that agriculture has the largest share of the population, that's where we need to focus our effort. And there is high potential of growth there in terms of modernization. And in that sense, you may see the numbers start reversing and having even more inclusivity as we wish. But currently, when you talk about who is growing, yes, we are seeing more into those sectors that I mentioned, but we want to see more even in terms of the agriculture sector. I hope it answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. On employment in agriculture, actually the figures for employment, they are coming from labor force survey, and it is conducted quarterly, but the quarterly rounds are aggregated annually to address seasonal fluctuation. But to be specific, for the agriculture employment, we only consider those employed in agriculture. If you are doing agriculture, that also includes market-oriented and tradable. If you respond that you are only doing for subsistence, foodstuff production, we do not consider in labor for surveyors employed in agriculture. We consider in other forms of work outside employment. So that's how it is. So if we say employment numbers, we're also including the ones in agriculture, but with fully or partially having agriculture for market-oriented or tradable agriculture. I hope it is answering, right? Okay, then there was something on monitoring skills development programs. Actually, I mentioned something on there's tracer survey. We're actually working on a solution, IT-enabled solution that can help us to understand employment outcome of different training programs. So it's going to be a metric to measure the performance of education program, and also to help understanding the outcome, which we later inform on the investment that has to be deployed. Let me leave the ISO interest rate for my colleagues.
Okay, yeah, me, I will go to the monitoring of the skills. This is a very important key because it is, we should not come here every year without data. I hope the World Bank is writing well, not a big document, but like we made, because from these skills, today with software is possible. In catering, in food processing, these are the numbers, and it happened because of that. So me, I'm supporting you from the private sector, because if we can do that, we can fix problem before it become even worse. I can give you an example. We can say we need innovation in Rwanda, but we have data showing us youth from East went to West. I don't know if West, they like water, they are chilling, but West is looking low in strategy in doing money. So some youth moved from East to West, and they are doing interesting agriculture, like plant of tomato and other things which East was not doing. So same country, same people. So monitoring for me, it's very key. Building a system, I was hearing like there is no supplier, there is no offer. A country like Rwanda, we should be able to create a platform, a joint platform where private sector, we put data. World Bank put data. Skills development. Skills development, we find out, even the RTB, USAID will go in one company and we work with that one company. But at the end, the bigger PSF is claimed why you are not doing that. So that monitoring I'm really in, and it can help us because you partners, you shouldn't, Rwanda is different. I'm happy I'm in software. There is a lot of things which are made now with software. The graphs, you said we can't change things quickly, but let's put our target like for the next event, we have this platform, we have live data, it is possible. Me, if she's not there, can now say something, Irene. Before building a new class, you say okay. Stop building one school. I know that the parents there will kill me. But build this platform. The cost will be the same. But the impact will be huge. Because we can monitor things. We can call someone from UR. We need to give grades to universities, to schools. They need to be closed. Because in private sector, there's no mercy. If I take a product I bring outside or I bring to my client, he's not happy. He will take an Indian one. He will take an American one. So you are saying you are going slowly on schools? You should not go slowly. Again, for the monitoring, this should be very transparent, and we should be able to have a strong system, monitored and fair. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. You wanted to answer? Calvin, yeah, please.
Very quickly on labor market numbers, to acknowledge that, yes, the seasonality effect that's being... Okay. Yes, so the seasonality effect that our colleague from UNDP was talking about, yes, is a reality. Just that in this case, in fact, I'll say what the main driver, the main sector driving the growth in labor market early 2024 in Rwanda is mostly retail, accommodation, and this really link, in fact, to the expansion we are seeing in the tourism. And important element of seasonality that is actually there is the education. And that's actually, in fact, leading to something that we are seeing that women in Rwanda for the first time has been the main beneficiary of job creations because of almost all the jobs created in education are going to women. In fact, that's what we have in those numbers. You have some coming from agriculture, but not that much. This sector I just talked about has been really the main driver. You can see on the Statistics Institute website. So on the ISO, that indicator, this is something we presented already in one of Rwanda economic updates. And that Rwanda economic update was focusing on international trade, participation of Rwanda firm to international trade. And this was coming from what? From one graph that I presented here on the decomposition of the growth. You can see the composition of growth in Rwanda from the demand side. If you have something that's really contributing very negatively, it's the trade, because Rwanda has been having this structural trade imbalance. In fact, we're talking about 15% of GDP. This has been the case, in fact, for many years. Now, when you go, in fact, you talk to friends in Rwanda, why is that actually being key constraint for you? I was very happy to see the graph that our panelists presented here. Yes, most of them say they lack information on those international markets, on the opportunity. But they also say that it's very difficult for them to have information on the standard, because Rwanda have possibility to have access to many preferential market access in Europe, in the United States, in any other developed country. So why are they not having access? Difficult to have information on the standard, very costly to secure those standards. This is a question, this is really something that's coming up very strongly, in fact, from those surveys. I don't know about the specific or the other country you are talking about, but of course, ISO is just one component. It doesn't drive the entire growth in the country, but it's an important element for trade for sure, and that is very important because a key challenge for the long-term growth we have in the country now is really that trade imbalance that we have. Stop here.
Anybody interest rate?
Thank you. Yeah.
Please introduce yourself.
Yes. He's asking me to stand because I'm behind here. I'm called Kasai from the National Bank of Rwanda. I'm the head of the Monetary Policy Department. I wanted to react on the comment or question from Joseph from the civil society, and maybe I understood that he was alluding to the levels of lending interest rate, if I'm not mistaken. But the level that you provided, maybe it's for some components or some areas of the economy. But when you look at the average lending rate, for instance, if you look at the average lending rate for the first half of this year, lending rate was at 15.68%, which is, of course, high for a borrower, but not that high as you mentioned. You are alluding to 19%. Then maybe, as I still talk about this lending interest rate and a question linking to the people, because you also alluded to that one, and linking it to the question from a colleague who talked about the source of the growth. If you look at that level of interest rate, and you also look at the lending from the banks to the economic agents, like, again, I'm talking about the first half of this year, we saw that new authorized loan increased by more than 41% this year, the first half. And this was on top of another high growth last year, which means that lending is happening in the economy. Then linking to the question again of the source of the growth, when you look at the orientation of the lending is mostly in trade and commerce. But if you allow, moderator, I wanted also to take this opportunity to link it to a question that I had, or a comment that I had initially. The question of maybe when we talk about the agriculture sector and the presentation that is much appreciated, the presentation from Rolf and Calvin, we are talking about the level of education, especially in the agriculture sector. But here we tend to, not only you, even myself, when I'm doing analysis, I tend to forget informal education. We are only talking about the formal education, but when you look at what is happening in the agriculture sector, some farmers are not having formal education, but with high experience from parents, because this is what I have observed, not a particular research, but even talking to farmers. I have colleagues who joined the farming recently from the academia, and reaching there, those who are teaching them, they have never been to school, and they understand the business very well. They know even how to analyze the climate before even hearing from the publications of the the publications of the Meteo Agency. Maybe that one has also to be underscored. The growth can also come from areas where we don't necessarily see in the numbers or in the formal education that was being discussed earlier. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And also, I mean, definitely there is an important role for experience and learning through working. And I think even Francois had alluded to that. And I think that's really important. May I please ask Pedro if he could answer the question on what we have learned, which came online from our viewers on the learning from the Asian tigers experience. The question is not on the screen now. Yeah, what lessons can Rwanda learn in terms of skill development and economic transformation from the Asian tiger economies? I think the first question on private sector collaboration, that has been answered by Aimable and Fran. So we will turn to the second one. Pedro?
Thank you, Abba. So lessons from the Asian tiger economy. So I think a couple of lessons that are relevant actually also to the conversation. So first is the investment in human capital, which preceded a lot of the development in these countries. So often because expenditure and GDP growth happen at the same time, it's difficult to see which goes first, whether spending human capital is driving economic growth or countries can spend more because they're growing. And what the Asian tigers experience shows is that the heavy investment in human capital that really preceded a lot of the development that happened later. The second one is really the role of the private sector, but not actually the role of how the public sector and the private sector work together. So a lot of the Asian tigers had a vision, and in terms of the privatization that was discussed before in the panel. So the government had a clear vision of where to go, but then they worked with the private sector and put the private sector in the driving seat. So if you go, I used to be based in Indonesia, so we worked a lot with Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand. And their skills councils are really focused on and composed of private sector people. So a lot of what has been discussed in the panel is actually really relevant, and we can draw these lessons from the Asian tigers. One more point I wanted to make is related to the inefficiencies and privatization, and a lot of what we mean about inefficiencies. So the biggest inefficiency that one can have in an education sector is to have a school with a teacher that is paid by the government who cannot generate learning in their students, because the government is picking up most of the tab, whatever the families are contributing, and that is not resulting in learning. And the same thing for the skills development part. So if you spend 2 years forming somebody that goes into the labor market and doesn't find a job, that's the biggest waste of the investment. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to invest a lot more. It's about making better decisions in the way they're investing. And that role of the private sector, as shown in the few examples that I gave on the Asian tigers, really shows that it's a lot more about how you spend than a lot of spending, especially once you spend what Rwanda, for example, is spending on education, which is close to 20%. There is not a whole lot of space to increase more. So it's a lot about using those resources effectively.
Thank you so much, Pedro. And I think we've had a very... Oh, sorry, Ruth, please.
Abba, with your permission, I can just take 1 minute to complement what Pedro has mentioned on the lessons we've learned from the Asian tigers. And in the report, there's a summary of those lessons in the annex. I think that the key takeaway is direct link of graduate outputs to priority skills of the economy. And that's why, as the minister mentioned about having a different conversation, do we need to continue with redundant training programs which are showing us no results in terms of direct link of graduate outputs to priority skills to labor market outcome. The second lesson is ring fencing or specialized access to specialized training. For example, what the chief economist was talking about, how do we modernize, mechanize agriculture, the highly advanced skills required that the private sector was talking about. And I think this is the idea behind the coding academy. So how do we identify these immediate and medium-term highly specialized skills that are immediately required, be deliberate, limit access, ensure the students, the existing workers accessing those are the right ones, have the right basic education on competencies, financing them, and quickly getting them out of the market to support the industry and the manufacturing. And the third lesson is upskilling of existing workers continuously to adjust to not just the needs of the labor market, but also improve productivity. And probably that's the question from the private sector. How do we support upskilling, whether formal or informal, to enhance that productivity as well as innovation and value chain. Otherwise, the lessons are summarized in the annex of the report.
Thank you so much, Ruth. That's super. So, please.
Not what we have 200,000 businesses, 90% informal. So we need a school for them. I don't know how I can put that, but what she's saying is very key. Let's also change the guys in school, the youth. Let's come up with a plan of people who are in a formal sector to teach them and upskill them. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. This has been a really interactive and a very learning session, and lots of ideas exchanged. I will not try to summarize such a rich discussion except by saying that we are very clear that human capital drives growth. But we have to, as the minister said, think differently. We have to innovate and prioritize. We have to, as all of you mentioned, that we need soft skills, you need foundational skills, you need also upskilling. You also need in place to have the role of the private and the public sector play a complementary role. You need, as the private sector said, help them to help you. So give them that opportunity, help them to organize themselves, get them to link to the global wallets as they promise that they can. And let's, have these joint platforms, as I said, the live data, the ring fencing, which Ruth is talking about, what's done in other countries. And then what Pedro said was also very important, and I think, Stella, you also mentioned is, it's not what you spend, but how you spend. And I think that's something critical. And then finally, to my friend from the civil society, I think transparency, monitoring, progress of what's being done of the frameworks is key, and definitely engaging the civil society in this is very important. So I take this opportunity to thank you all. It's been a great privilege to be here and do a moderation for you, such an esteemed panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abra and our panelists. Can we please give them another round of applause? Thank you so much. We're coming to the end of our session today. Thank you so much for being with us. I'd now like to invite the country manager of the World Bank back up to the stage to give some concluding remarks. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Before everyone runs out of the room, let me just take this opportunity to thank all of you for being here for what I consider as a fruitful discussion this afternoon. Let me just try to, just highlight some key points that we picked up from the discussions this afternoon. The Minister of State rightly challenged us to have a different conversation And I'm glad that we believe we have done that today, or at least started those discussions today. We all agree that we need greater investment in priority skills for the labor market and in job matching. I think it's also important that we know and agree that improving the quality of internships, especially by paying interns a livable wage, is essential to grow the skills base. We especially need to invest in agriculture to boost specialized skills for today and tomorrow. It's great to hear that the private sector is all fired up and ready to further contribute. We count on the partnership of the private sector. We also need to constantly understand market needs and respond quickly. So let me end by saying that we are grateful to our speakers, all of them, panelists, and the audience for your active participation. I thank you all.
Thank you so much, Shah. Thank you so much, everyone. A reminder to download the report. The QR code will be on the screen shortly. Thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate it. Murakaza Chani. Musamwiza.